Look closely at this microscopic footage. We are watching a single embryonic cell multiply into a dense cluster. This kinetic activity defines the first trimester, a 12-week window of violent, rapid cellular construction. Biologists refer to these initial 12 weeks using a precise medical framework, organogenesis. During organogenesis, the core architecture for every major system in the human body is laid down. The brain, the heart, and the spinal cord all have their distinct cellular pathways established during this phase. In a matter of weeks, a complete structural blueprint translates from a single microscopic entity into a functional anatomy. This creates a biological paradox. The period of highest structural vulnerability overlaps exactly with the time frame before a woman typically realizes she is pregnant. Early physiological indicators, like severe fatigue or a missed cycle, are frequently misclassified as baseline environmental stress or simple exhaustion. Ignoring those early metabolic indicators means the rapidly dividing embryo remains completely exposed to any systemic imbalances in the maternal environment. Specific maternal inputs and environmental factors directly dictate the success or failure of the embryo's structural outcomes at the cellular level. We will analyze this by contrasting optimal cellular differentiation against environments that have been altered by pharmacological, nutritional, or endocrine disruptors. Because early development occurs entirely in the dark, preemptive physiological optimization is the only mechanism available to protect the foundation of the developing fetus. The developmental timeline begins at week 1, triggering at the precise moment of fertilization. Over the next few days, the newly fertilized zygote travels through the fallopian pathways, migrating steadily toward the uterine cavity. This journey culminates in implantation, where the cellular cluster embeds itself into the nutrient-rich lining of the uterus to secure a blood supply. This timeline tracks exponential scale. Over 4 weeks, a single cell multiplies into a spherical cluster at millions of divisions per day. The cells actively differentiate into 3 distinct tissue layers, each coded to become specific organ systems. Maintaining this localized explosion of cellular activity requires significant fuel. It triggers a massive systemic energy reallocation throughout the maternal body. This hidden biological energy drain correlates directly to the sudden onset of symptoms like profound fatigue and nausea. The embryo possesses no internal reserves. It relies entirely on the maternal bloodstream for every raw material used to build tissue. These initial 4 weeks establish the critical biological supply lines that the embryo will rely upon for the remainder of organogenesis. Between weeks 5 and 8, the embryo enters the critical developmental window for cardiovascular and central nervous system formation. The most urgent priority is the neural tube, the precursor structure that folds to create the human brain and spinal cord. Folate acts as a mandatory biochemical substrate required for fetal DNA synthesis. Without sufficient folate available in the bloodstream, cellular division physically cannot proceed fast enough to close the neural structures. This split screen illustrates the mechanical difference. On the left, high concentrations of folic acid actively integrate into dividing cells, constructing a fully closed neural tube. On the right, folate is sparse, stalling division and causing an incomplete neural closure. This structural failure is the direct biomechanical cause of severe neural tube defects, such as spina bifida. The maternal diet prior to conception dictates the baseline folate saturation available to the embryo during this rapid division phase. Structural differentiation adheres to a strict chronological schedule. The biology does not pause development to wait for missing nutrients. If the required biochemical substrates are absent during this exact multi-week window, the resulting anatomical defects are permanent and irreversible. Beyond nutritional deficits, active environmental disruptors crossing the early placental interface introduce separate mechanical risks. We classify these disruptors as teratogens, pharmacological agents that actively interfere with development. Taking over-the-counter painkillers, certain common antibiotics, or unverified herbal remedies poses a distinct danger when ingested before a pregnancy is confirmed. Here at the maternal-fetal bloodstream interface, angular teratogenic compounds bypass early filtration systems, crossing the semi-permeable barrier to lock onto embryonic receptors. This barricade deflects necessary oxygen and nutrients, actively stalling local tissue differentiation. External pharmaceuticals are one risk, but the maternal body can also produce internal disruptors through the endocrine impact of chronic stress. Transient daily stress is harmless. The risk arises from chronic, sustained cortisol saturation in the maternal bloodstream. High concentrations of circulating cortisol can penetrate the fetal environment, pushing the baseline hormonal balance out of equilibrium. This endocrine shift destabilizes the gestational environment necessary to maintain a viable pregnancy in the first trimester. Unmonitored pharmacological inputs and chronic systemic stress act as active biomechanical destabilizers. They physically rewrite the embryo's developmental blueprint during its most fragile state. By the completion of week 12, the window of primary organogenesis closes. The cardiovascular, neurological, and respiratory systems are now preliminarily integrated. This marks the transition out of the structural formation phase. The remaining trimesters are dedicated almost entirely to growth and maturation. Any structural anomalies introduced during those first 12 phases, the architecture is locked in. This biological reality informs the specific clinical protocols assigned to expectant parents. Medical professionals focus on a triad of preemptive physiological optimization, immediate folic acid supplementation, rigorous pharmacological review of all medications, and active endocrine stress regulation. Because the timeline of fetal vulnerability moves much faster than a patient's symptom awareness, these protocols must be enacted before clinical confirmation of the pregnancy. Additionally, patients must recognize acute clinical thresholds that require immediate medical intervention, such as severe localized pain, irregular bleeding, or continuous vomiting. The precise physiological and biochemical baseline provided by the mother during these initial 12 weeks is the primary determinant of a human being's lifelong anatomical and functional health.